we'd like to bring a very special guest up, Mr. Michael Brady. I had the pleasure of listening to him speak in an all-staff function, and he might allude to, he brought him there, and the people that did the work, the corporations that set up the foundation to invest the money in life-saving treatments. So without further ado, I would like to bring Michael up, and please, if I could have everyone's undivided attention. This is a 44-year-old father of two who has inspired me, inspired the rest of our staff, and it's why we do what we do. So please, let's have Michael share a few words.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Larry. I'm very pleased to be here to speak to you about my journey, my cancer journey that I had. I wanted to say first a big thank you to all the people that helped me survive and get through my cancer. I'm one of thousands of cancer patients, so I'm really privileged to be here to tell you about my story. I'm very grateful to the Princess Margaret Foundation for all the work that they do to raise funds to help the Princess Margaret treat and battle and cure cancer. And I'm also very grateful for my stem cell donor that I still haven't met, but I hope to this summer, that donated his stem cells, and for the team at Princess Margaret to help save my life. Let me tell you a little bit about my life. I'm 43, almost 44. I have two little red-headed Tasmanian devils named Tomas and Mateo. They're 9 and 6 years old. They keep me going, keep my wife going. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Carolina, and we've been married for 16 years. And we're a very happy family, and a very fortunate family. In the fall of 2013, I started to have a little trouble walking upstairs. I was winded, I thought I was out of shape. And I was meeting with my doctor at Princess Margaret, Dr. Vikas Gupta, an amazing person, amazing doctor. And he identified in my blood that my counts didn't seem very right. And he said, Mike, why don't you come back in a month and we're going to look at what the counts look like. So this was around the beginning of December. We were a little concerned, the caution flag went up. And but we had to wait another 4 to 6 weeks or so to find out what happened in the new year. So my wife and I did what any rational parents would do. We spoiled the hell out of our kids and we flew to Vegas for New Year's and had a good time. When we came back, I had another meeting with Dr. Gupta, and we said, oh, Mike, it's bad news. It looks like you may be developing a rare form of cancer. We're going to do a bone marrow biopsy to confirm. So they drilled into my hip, took out some bone marrow, studied it. I had to wait another 4 weeks or so to get the results. And I came back, and Dr. Gupta told my wife and I that, yeah, you have a very rare form of leukemia called myelofibrosis. And Dr. Gupta said, it's very aggressive, so we have to be aggressive. You have to have a bone marrow transplant. If we don't have a bone marrow transplant, Mike, you probably won't survive longer than 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years. So it was very clear that we had to do this transplant. Then we knew that we had to find a donor, someone to give me their stem cells. And my 3 siblings, unfortunately, weren't matches. So they had to do an anonymous search. They did find a donor, a 10 out of 10 match, within about 2 months. You might be asking yourself, well, what is myelofibrosis? Really, what myelofibrosis is, it's an aggressive form of cancer. It's basically where your bone marrow dies off. It stops producing blood, it turns into scar tissue, and you eventually stop having the ability to produce your own blood. So there was a lot of emotional impact associated with being diagnosed with cancer, but also a cancer that was, you know, the one that was basically a form of death sentence unless we had some very innovative treatment. You know, I had the fear of dying, the fear of my wife becoming a widow, the fear of my young son not remembering me. I had the fear of my oldest son being misguided without a father. But you know, those fears started to settle because I rooted myself in my family, in the great support that I had from my friends, I knew regardless of what happened, my family would be okay, my wife, my children. And then we started to focus on the preparation. I had about 8 months to prepare for my transplant. I was told that my chances of surviving the bone marrow transplant was 50-50. And so I had to adopt an attitude and a focus that was very positive, very focused on success. And I read a book from Chris Hadfield, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. Some of you may have read it. He talked about, imagine yourself walking down the street and NASA grabbing you and strapping you to the top of a rocket and starting to count down 10, 9, 8, and so on. And how scared you would be if you didn't have the opportunity to prepare, to go through the worst case scenarios, to get your life in order, to do everything you needed to do before you went through that. So I adopted that attitude of preparedness. I did everything in my power to prepare for the transplant. I took care of my will, my life insurance, forgiveness issue with family members. I mended fences. We took a trip to Disney that you could produce a commercial about. We had an amazing time as a family. And I was able to concentrate totally on success, free of all burden. At the 8-month mark in August, I was in the best condition of my life. And I was very fortunate, and I'm sure many of you know patients that didn't have the opportunity to prepare like I had. It doesn't have the runway that I had to prepare. And I wanted to mention that over this 8-month period, we were concerned that things may start to go a little bit wonky with my blood and may not be qualified for a bone marrow transplant, which happens. So we called around my father-in-law to the Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, to Boston, to the Massachusetts State Hospital, Mount Sinai in New York, to get input about having our bone marrow transplant done there. And we were told we were in good hands. Some of the best care that we could receive would be at Princess Margaret. So even other cancer centers recognize Princess Margaret as being a world-leading facility. And I was also very fortunate because I was selected to do my bone marrow transplant under a clinical trial. Paul talked about the innovations that are going on at Princess Margaret. I was the first patient in Canada to ever have a bone marrow transplant done the way that I had it done. I had some preconditioning therapy that I went through with some special drugs. They modified my chemotherapy regime before I had the transplant. And the expectation was that my chances of survival would increase from 50% to 70%. So it was an easy choice for me to go ahead and do the clinical trial. The clinical trial was paid for by the Princess Margaret Foundation, by donors like yourself, the lotteries, by the Elizabeth and Tony Comfort Myelofibrosis Fund. And I can tell you that at the beginning of the trial, I had to pay some of the expenses out of my own pocket, and it was around $10,000 a month just for the medication. So you can imagine people that are less fortunate positions than ourselves, how they have to rely on the hospital to help fund their treatments and fund their innovative care. The transplant itself was a little bit uneventful. The chemotherapy was not, but the transplant itself it was. I had about a week of chemotherapy, starting around the 12th of August, and after that, I had my stem cell transplant. It was a little red sack of blood, very dark red, connected to a tube that went through my chest into my heart. And that pumped these stem cells out to my body. Eventually, those stem cells made their way to my bone marrow that was eradicated by the chemical therapy. And these little stem cells planted there and started to grow and reproduce my bone marrow. The care I received at the hospital during all of this, and even my clinic visits, was unbelievable, absolutely superb. Nowhere else in Ontario could you receive the care that you receive at Princess Margaret. One of the hardest things was the isolation from my family. You don't have an immune system when you have a stem cell transplant. So I was isolated, and I wasn't able to see my children. And I remember being in the hospital one night. My wife brought my kids to the parking lot behind the hospital, and they stood underneath the lighting so I could see them. And my lights were on in my room, and I was waving to them 14 floors up so that they could see me, and I could see them. So that was one of the hardest parts. But this is a really good story because it's a success story. I'm 21 months past my transplant now. My hospital visits about every 3 months or so. I had about 40 blood transfusions. And I mention this because 40 anonymous people helped me, all the doctors helped me, all the medical staff, all the coordinators that coordinated the transplant, my family, my friends, and by the will of God, I survived. And all of this work had to be paid for, and it's paid for again by the foundation and supporters like yourself. And I had to be patient through all of this. You know, each week we would go in, how's the blood, how are things going, you know, what's the status? And one of the doctors, Dr. Loach, told me, Michael, you have to be patient. It's like trying to grow a forest from seeds, is what we're trying to do. So 21 months on, I still have that in my mind. I'm in the process of ramping up my own business. I'm working on my family, my overall health, my well-being, moving past the shell shock of having to go through a transplant and the cancer diagnosis, and the return to our normal. So like trying to grow a forest from seeds, I know that slow and steady progress will win this race. And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your generosity.